This video accompanies Module 4 of the course. We've talked about the elements that are necessary for a contract to exist, but even though a contract exists, because all four of the elements are present, there still is the possibility that the contract might not be enforced by a court. That's because there can be an issue with the first element of a contract, the agreement. Remember that for an agreement to exist, there has to be an offer made by an offeror to an offeree, and the offeree has to accept that offer. But the offer and the acceptance have to be genuine. That is, they have to be real. They can't be the result of a mistake or misrepresentation or a trick or because somebody was forced. Sometimes the idea that the assent to a contract has to be genuine is expressed as the parties have to have a meeting of the minds. They have to be talking about the same thing voluntarily. The assent to a contract has to be genuine, and issues involving the assent to a contract that arise in three situations. There's a mistake that's been made in making the contract. Someone has been misled into making the contract, or someone has been forced into making a contract that they didn't want to make. In the case of a mistake, how a mistake in making the contract will affect the validity of the contract depends on who made the mistake and the circumstances of the mistake. Generally, a unilateral mistake, a mistake made by one party to the contract, is not enough for a court to invalidate the contract. The idea is that people who enter into contracts should understand the contract. And if they don't understand the contract, they shouldn't enter into the contract until they do understand the contract. And so if somebody who is a party to a contract makes a mistake because they don't understand what the contract is about, if they're the only mistake that was made, then the court really isn't going to have a lot of sympathy for the person in most cases. The idea being you have to look out for yourself. There are exceptions, though. If a court determines that the party to a contract who didn't make a mistake knew the other party was making a mistake and didn't let them know that they were making a mistake, and it's material, it's important to the contract, then the court might very well say, well, you were trying to take advantage of somebody, and we aren't going to enforce this contract. If the mistake is so serious, one-sided mistake, a unilateral mistake, but it's so serious that it makes the contract unfair, court might determine that the contract is unconscionable and therefore unenforceable. If there's a mutual mistake about something in the contract that's important to the contract, that is both sides make a mistake, well, there really hasn't been that meeting of the mind that's required for there to be a valid agreement, and a court probably would not enforce a contract where both sides to the contract were mistaken about what the contract was about or some major aspect of the contract. In negotiating a contract, it's typical for the parties to the contract to exchange information. If some of the information from one of the parties to the contract is incorrect, then that's a misrepresentation. But the effect of the misrepresentation depends on the intent. If you and I are negotiating a contract and I tell you something about some major aspect, some important aspect of the contract that's not true, but I don't know it's not true, and I think it is true, and it's not my intention to defraud you, then that's an innocent misrepresentation, might make the contract unfair and unconscionable, but a court's not going to invalidate the contract just because I told you something that wasn't accurate. If, however, a party to a contract tells the other party to the contract some information that the party knows is not true, and they know that if the other party to the contract knew the accurate information, they wouldn't enter into the contract, well, that's a fraudulent misrepresentation, and a court is probably not going to enforce a contract where that kind of thing has happened. If a person has entered into a contract involuntarily, that can be the result of two situations. One is what's called undue influence. If I, for instance, if someone has confidence in me and values my opinion and is not as knowledgeable as I am about what a contract is about, and I use my influence on that person to cause them to enter into a contract they probably wouldn't have entered into if they had known the true information, and they entered into the contract based on their trust for me, and I abused that trust by telling them to enter into a contract that I knew wasn't in their best interest, to benefit myself or to benefit somebody else. That's undue influence, and a court is probably going to invalidate that contract. Another situation where a person might enter into a contract involuntarily is in the situation of duress. Duress means force. If someone forces you, either by threatening to commit physical harm to you or to cause you some sort of financial loss, some kind of economic loss, unless you enter into this contract, that's duress, that's force. And a court, in more cases than not, is going to refuse to enforce that contract because it wasn't really voluntarily entered into. If you have any questions about this information or other information in this module, please let me know, and I will provide some more information and help resolve any questions you have.